So I like to do a little internet sleuthing and digging and seeing what I can find out about the person that I'm talking to on their Instagram or Twitter. For you, I went to Instagram and here is something that I saw. Here's a post that you wrote. It says this: I had a patient who was brutally assaulted, and his pastor told him, "You have to forgive him or you'll go to hell." This is not the first time I've heard this. It's a theology that keeps the power with those in power. That pastor, by protecting the abuser, was protecting himself. Any theology that prioritizes the abuser and dismisses the victim is 100% defending its own institutional abuse. And then here's your last line: forced forgiveness is a false truce. Can you tell us a little bit about that last line? Forced forgiveness is a false truce.
Well, first, thank you for looking that up. And yeah, that's great that you do the research on that. And, that forced forgiveness is a false truce. I think there is an idea theologically, spiritually, psychologically, there is a very human idea that we want to connect with people and we want to continue connecting with them even if they've hurt us. And that's very human. And I think the my optimistic explanation is that people want to view each other as um, decent and good, and you couldn't have possibly done that hurtful thing to me. It was a bad day, or you were off, or there was something wrong. And many times that's actually true. That so often it's true where when we have goodwill on both sides and there is true relational capital, yes, the thing that you did that was an off day or was out of character wasn't something you intended to harm me. Let's talk that through. However, when there's a person who has a pattern of abuse or there's something they haven't worked out, or their output is from unresolved stuff that they have not processed and catalyzed. There is a danger there in that our very good intent of wanting to reconnect, forgive, to keep making this work, that's when it becomes forced. And that's when the natural human, even divine wisdom of trying to forgive and reconnect can become hurtful because now there is no longer goodwill on both sides. It's inequitable. We're not on the same ground and the same page. And I think there is in Christian circles and church circles, and sometimes even in psychology circles, mental health circles, there's an idea that we need to forgive in order for ourselves to feel stable and to feel right. We need to reconnect. And that's where it becomes a false truce. But I don't think forgiveness ought to be about, I am reconnecting with this person and now I'm good. I don't think that should be necessarily the priority. And it's made that way, I think, because of a type of theology that says we all need to move past this into the future eschatological hope where all things are okay, instead of looking at the present suffering and the harm that was caused and the discomfort of this injury. So I think we need to look more closely at the grief of that, at the pain of that, and see the injury that was caused and not look away from that and try to rush towards that conclusion. Yeah. So, yeah, I think having that truce where we're all okay and there's no tension, that's like an ideal, lovely sitcom ending. We want to bow tie it. And of course, that's a lovely, beautiful thing when that happens, when forgiveness happens. But when we're in a situation where it's inequitable, not goodwill on both sides, that's when we really need to pause, hit the brakes, and look at, why was this injury caused? Is it better if there's reconnection? Is reconciliation really the goal?
I'll never forget. I think it was probably my sixth or something time through the Bible that I saw this part where it said that Samuel never sees Saul again until his death. So there is no reconciliation of their relationship in an earthly standpoint. And I just always thought, that's really interesting that the prophet Samuel, who seems to have a very healthy, good, strong relationship with God, knew that this relationship, the pattern that Saul had set, was not good for him to be a part of. And so he walked away from it. And so I like that you say that, because I do think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as Christians, um, to not know when to walk away. And there are situations and circumstances when we have to, for our good and the good of the other person, right? Weaken the tie, walk away. Can you tell us a little bit about your background as a chaplain? You say a chaplain is like a cross between a priest and a therapist. I love that. What made you go into that line of work?
Yeah, so hopefully not to make a short story long.
You can tell the long story. We're fine. We're here, brother.
Yeah, I originally started off in pastoral ministry, doing church ministry. I was like with youth and college students. I did that for almost 7 years. Yeah. So I grew up an atheist, made this hard pivot toward into seminary and then church ministry.
Okay, wait, no, no, we're not gonna rush past that. You grew up atheist. Okay, how does the atheist become the therapriest? How did that happen?
Yeah. Again, hopefully not to make a short story long, but no, I'll tell you, it's the way that I got into faith, the way that I first encountered Christianity. This church, when I was like, I think early college, asked me to play drums for their praise team. And I said, "Is it a problem that I'm an atheist?" And they said, "No." They said, "Yeah, just go on and play drums. We need a drummer." So I played. And you know what, Heather? This church loved me so much. The pastor, his sermons, his English was not his first language. His sermons, he was so passionate. They were not like the most well thought out sermons or anything, but I could tell that he loved God and that he experienced the love of God. And this church just kept loving me, and it was no one apologetic or persuasive argument. There was no magical combination of words that unlocked faith for me. They just kept loving me, and then at some point I started actually listening to the sermons. And I I almost extrapolated backwards, like, there's a source to all of this. And I thought, "Oh, maybe these people are just kinda, grew up in a weirdly sheltered, home or something." But one by one, as I started hearing their stories, they didn't. They kinda grew up like me, with trauma, with poverty, with lots of hard things. And I started to discover this love is supernatural. There's something to this. So I just almost went backwards and found, okay, I believe there's got to be this inalterable, permanent, cosmic source of love, this constancy. And that's how I found God. And maybe that understanding of God is kind of goopy, but, you know, yeah, again, it wasn't any academic persuasion. There was nothing like that. And I was all about, empirical evidence that I was such a strong militant atheist, but it was just this love that tenderized and melted and then galvanized me. And then I went into seminary, not even fully, I hadn't read the Bible. I hadn't fully understood faith. Um, I remember that first day of seminary. I went to a Baptist seminary, and I was like an undercover, I guess, maybe centrist slash progressive. Like I just kind of went in because I wanted a degree. I wanted to be in church ministry. I wanted to help people. And so I thought this is the best way to do that. And somebody made a joke in the class where they're like, "Yeah, just like when Moses did it." And everybody laughed. And I didn't know what they were talking about. So they, they all laughed. I was just like, "Ah, ha, 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 yeah, yeah, like Moses, right?" I had to catch up. Um, yeah. So then when I went to church ministry, I felt like very quickly I was an oddball there. Like I was always looking in through a window from the outside, because there was a part of me that it's almost like that story about, that kind of made up story about the guy who uh, ends up on an island with a Bible, and then he gets rescued, and then he goes to a church and he goes, "Wait a minute. I read this Bible on an island by myself. This is not what I thought the church would look like, when he finally gets to one." And I just wasn't good at the backroom politics and kind of the fundraising stuff. And then the church, I wasn't good at. Maybe I'm not clever enough or something. I just didn't have the savvy. And thank God for pastors and ministers who are good at that kind of thing. They can navigate that sort of, because it's almost like you got to be a CEO or good at business nowadays to run a church. And I'm not, yeah, and I'm not making fun of that or poking fun of that. That's a whole enterprise that I found I didn't understand. And the leadership at the first church that I was at, unfortunately, was toxic. And, some of the, like, kind of the thing you read in the beginning, those power dynamics and some of the abuse that was happening. And I didn't know that I was in a toxic place. And I think some of that was spiritual, but some of that was also cultural. I deferred to my elders. I trusted them, and the male leadership, I trusted them. So, I got all twisted up with the religious and cultural stuff. So then I ended up in a good church. And then I decided, even though I'm in a healthier place, this is still not where I want to be. So, thank God for my wife. When I got married, I didn't have a job because I left the church ministry altogether like 3 months before I got married. So, I didn't have a job at the time. But I remember doing this prison ministry where they talked about chaplaincy, and that was in the, like, not in the back of my mind, somewhere in the middle of my brain. And I remember, oh, chaplaincy sounds like this paradise. And they told me it's basically like being a pastor, but outside of the church, the military or law enforcement or the hospital. And so when I signed up for it, did the internship, I remember that first week I had a wildly difficult visit. I shadowed another chaplain, and you know how there are such few rare moments in life where all your story and experience and even the trauma and the pain, it just, you're in a room and everything clicks and you realize my gifting and my story, this is where I belong, you know? And it's rare when that happens, right? When you realize I just belong here. But when it happens, you know it. It's almost this audible click, right? And we were breaking this news to this family that their loved one had died, impossible situation, impossible. And yet I knew this is where I'm supposed to be. And almost 9 years later, I feel more called than ever, even that this is where I belong.